Hello and welcome to RacingNews365.com Answers Fan Questions. You are joined by myself, Nick Golding, lead editor Ian Parks, and 2023 Young Journalist of the Year, Sam Coop, to answer your questions from last weekend's incredible British Grand Prix. And we're going to waste absolutely no time and get straight into it with the first question, which comes from Montclair. Ian, I'm going to bring it to you. Was this a lucky shot or a lucky victory for Hamilton? And could he fight for the win in Budapest, the Hungarian Grand Prix, and at Spa, the Belgian Grand Prix?
Hi there. Thank you for the question. Much appreciated. To answer it, I absolutely believe this was not a lucky win. What we saw across the British Grand Prix weekend was quite simply Lewis Hamilton at his finest. Alongside that victory for me ranks alongside many of his most sublime successes that we've seen, stretching back throughout his entire 17-year career. That was his 104th F1 victory. Many of them not memorable, but for me, that one most definitely was memorable. It was memorable because it was evident to me that Mercedes now has a car with which it can fight at the front of the grid. Mercedes locked out the front row, and with Lewis, they delivered a superb strategy underlined by a driver that was able to deliver in a car that was so far removed from the first 2 years of these current regulations in 2022 and 2023. Toto Wolff, the Mercedes team principal, said it immediately after the Grand Prix on Sunday when I spoke to him that Mercedes are back, quote unquote. And when you consider as well, when he confirmed in his post-race media debrief that Mercedes will have upgrades for the car in the Hungaroring and at Spa-Francorchamps, then you have to believe that no way was this a one-off performance and one-off result. Bearing in mind as well, Lewis has always enjoyed the Hungaroring. And if he has a car with those additional upgrades and they are perceived to be working, then without a shadow of a doubt, he will be in the fight for another race win there. Spa-Francorchamps, very, very different circuit. Again, upgrades to be delivered on the W15. Not 100% sure as to what those upgrades are going to be for both of those circuits. But so far, everything that Mercedes has delivered from Imola onwards has added performance or aided its balance or just improved pace. So for me, just to succinctly answer the question, in conclusion, yes, Lewis will be in the fight in both Hungary and Belgium.
Excellent stuff, Montclair. Thank you very much for your question. Sam, going to throw the next one over to you. And it's about Oscar Piastri, and it comes from Virgie. Would Piastri have won the race if McLaren had double stacked? And of course, that's in reference to when the rain intensified and all of a sudden everybody boxed for intermediates except Oscar Piastri, who was made to do an additional lap.
Well, first of all, thank you for the question. It's a very good one. It's tricky because obviously it's difficult to go back and replay events with a changed variable. But to address the question with only changing that variable, I still think it would have been very, very tough given the pace that Max had coming through, and also that Oscar would have lost a little bit more time to Lando. And then obviously you would have had Lewis up there ahead. So Oscar would have had to have come through those guys. However, he would have been on the medium tyre, which seems to be the best tyre to be on. That either that or the hards that we saw Max Verstappen put to such good use in that final stint. So I think he certainly would have been in the shout. I think a podium probably would have been a more likely result. I just think he would have had too much ground to make up given the loss of time from the double stack.
Great answer, Virgie. Thank you very, very much for your question. Coming on to the next one, and it's going to go to all three of us because, it's all good for us to give our opinions. And it is from, and I apologise, by the way, if any of these names I get incorrect. Shocking with names, I'll be honest with you. And it comes from Fast and Milan. Who do you think will be the 2025 champion? Of course, that's next season, which is a really interesting one, given that, we're currently seeing so many teams competing for victories. Next year, I'm going to go first. I still think Max Verstappen, I think in the current regulations, I think he'll win this year. And I think as well, he'll just have enough next year, given that we're going to see probably not too much development over the upcoming winter break, which is still 12 races away. Sam, bring it to you next.
Well, I mean, you can't rule out Max ever. So that's, but if I'm going to try and give an answer that isn't Max, I think the next best thing, and this might be a little bit controversial, I'm going to go with George Russell. I think that Mercedes, potentially bold, but I think Mercedes are going to continue to capitalize on the gains they've made of late. He'll be most likely leading that team. If it is, say, a Kimi Antonelli alongside him, he's going to have a huge learning curve. Yeah. And that looks like the most likely option. Carlos Sainz, if that, the rumours that are starting to spring up again over whether or not he might take a 1-year deal, that would be a much more difficult proposition for George. But yeah, I think he has a lot to learn and a long way to go. So similar to the kind of journey that Lando Norris is on at the moment. But if he can do that in the next, half of the season, I think he could be there or thereabouts. But that would be very, very dependent on how Mercedes can do as well in the development race.
Over to you, Ian.
I thought that was a brilliant answer, to be fair, Sam. Really enjoyed listening to that. It is obviously incredibly difficult to try and predict the 2025 champion when we are only halfway through 2024. And when you consider the competitive... Oh, God, I can't get my words out in a minute. Do apologise. When you consider the competitiveness of the field at present, certainly with McLaren taking it to Red Bull initially, then we had Ferrari showing its hand for a short while, and now we've obviously got Mercedes clearly making great strides. And you have to consider, if that continues to be the case, with Toto Wolff saying that everything has clicked with regard to their developmental path, that they are now adding upgrade after upgrade after upgrade, in contrast to Red Bull, where Christian Horner has made no secret of the fact previously that, as far as he can see, Red Bull has effectively either reached or is now close to reaching the top of its own developmental curve. So you have to wonder just what is left to come from Red Bull at this present time going into the second half of this season, because it has to be borne in mind, and just to clarify for people as well, that next year there will virtually be zero development on the cars that finish this year compared to those that will start next year, simply on the basis that all the teams will be focused almost 100% with regard to development for the 2026 car, because as I'm sure everybody's aware, we've got a major new rule package, brand new power units, associated aerodynamics, and so full focus, full budget, full energy will be on 2026. So the car that comes out of this season as the leader in the field will most likely, barring a few little tweaks, of course, there's always going to be little things along the way, but you're not going to be seeing major upgrades next year like we've had this year. So this year, with all these upgrades we're seeing on these cars, is very much not only with one eye on fighting Red Bull right now, it's also with the possibility of firmly challenging Red Bull even more for 2025. So George Russell, actually, whilst it might sound a little bit of a fantasy call now, is actually not a bad shout at all if Mercedes can continue on this steep, it would appear, developmental curve right now. My personal call, yeah, of course, as you guys have both said, you cannot rule out Max. Definitely not. Who would I go for? I think the way McLaren are going, I think Lando is continuing to develop all the time. Yes, he's had his down moments, of course, this season. And as we discussed in the podcast earlier this week, he does tend to beat himself up an awful lot, but I've got a feeling he's learning so much and his own personal developmental curve is so steep that I'm going to go for Lando for next year.
Great answers. And of course, there is so much to look forward to next season, but we've still got 12 thrilling races left in 2024 and everything is heating up very nicely. Ian, I'm going to throw the next question to you. And thank you very much to Fast and Milan. Great question. Ian, this comes from Orkai. What is happening with Ferrari and did they keep the wrong driver?
Oh, second half of that question is very tricky, Orkai, I have to say. First half is a little easy to answer. Quite simply, they've just hit a developmental rough patch. Ferrari brought this upgrade at Imola and it worked well. They made a reasonable start to the season up against Red Bull, but then they brought the Imola package. And for them, as I say, it was one that worked really well. Of course, they got the win around Monaco with Charles Leclerc. Fantastic performance. Yes, we know Monaco is a very unique circuit. However, it was a car that was balanced. It rode the curbs, it rode the bumps, and it looked from that point onwards that actually Ferrari were going to be the closest challengers to Max and Red Bull. Skipping the anomaly of Canada aside, when Ferrari brought its next upgrade package in Barcelona, I remember speaking with one of their top engineers, Jock Clear, a man of great repute, been there for many, many years. And he said at the time that because of the developmental race they were in at the moment with the teams around them, that they had actually fast-tracked that particular upgrade package onto the car in a bid to try and make that leap ahead of them. What they saw in Imola was a package that worked well. So when a team is developing a car, it's not just a case of, okay, here are some developments, we'll put them on the car, we'll run it a bit, how they worked, okay, it didn't do this or it did that, whatever. No, that's not how developmental curves work within Formula One teams. They continue to develop, so the package in Spa would have been in place in the pipeline before it actually put the package on in Imola. The package in Spa was effectively an extra further development to try and add to what it found with regard to pace and performance in Imola. Unfortunately for Ferrari, it hasn't really worked as well as it would hoped. So now it might have to do a little bit of backtracking to try and work out why this package hasn't worked and how to get the best out of it going forward. I'm pretty confident, given the brains that they have within that team, that they will be able to get on top of it in relatively short order, but only time will tell. Now, second half of that question, have they got rid of the wrong driver? I'm assuming you're only saying that, Orkai, on the basis that Carlos has so far proven himself to be, certainly since Monaco or after Monaco, appears to have handled things better than Charles Leclerc, and that would most definitely appear to be the case. It's a very close call. I can understand why Fred Vasseur made the call in opting to keep Charles more than Carlos. I think within Charles they see a more well-rounded, greater packaged driver that is in the Ferrari mold compared to Carlos Sainz. And when I talk about Ferrari mold, I'm talking about that kind of hero that Ferrari has so often seen in the past. I've seen images of Charles before where you have this religious kind of figure with his head pictured on top of it and almost like going that kind of pose, that the hand there and there. So it gives you some idea as to the esteem in which Charles is held. And I think there would have been a greater outcry from the Tifosi if Lewis Hamilton had replaced Charles Leclerc than Carlos Sainz, despite the performances of the two drivers leading up to that decision, bearing when you consider that Sainz had been a Grand Prix winner in Singapore last year, was the only non-Red Bull driver to win a Grand Prix with that Singapore triumph. So I hope that kind of answers your question. As I say, I think for Ferrari, Charlie's their golden boy compared to Carlos, and there would have been a greater backlash if he had gone rather than Carlos.
Great explanation. Orca, an amazing question. Thank you very, very much. Sam, we'll fire the next one over to you, and it comes from Simon. Is it possible to kick Sergio Perez out, even with his new contract?
Very good question. Thank you, Simon. The short answer is yes. And the context around that is, well, first of all, you may have heard of an expression goes something like this. As soon as the contract is signed, there are lawyers who will be working behind the scenes to try and find a way out of it. And that is, I mean, Formula One is a great example of that. And also Red Bull as a wider team is also a great example of that, as we've seen in the past with how it manages its drivers and its contracts. So yes, there certainly is that risk anyway, but what further heightens that risk for Sergio Perez is a number of performance-based incentives in his contract. Now, that in itself is nothing unusual, nothing new. That is always the case with driver contracts, and even the fact that Sergio has a 1+1 deal, a second year being a team option, so they can, at the end of 2025, say, how happy are we, regardless of how he's performing. But what we do know is that there are some performance-based incentives that are contingent upon the summer break at this stage. And one of those is that he needs to be within 100 points of Max Verstappen in the championship. He is currently 137 points behind. And we have 2 races until the summer break. And the reason why the summer break is at the moment important in this conversation is that there's a lot of speculation about whether or not Red Bull would make a summer change, with Daniel Ricciardo and Liam Lawson seemingly waiting in the wings. So Sergio has a really, really tough task at hand because, as we know, a maximum of 52 points are available to Sergio. And he's got, eradicate at least 37 of that gap to Verstappen. So he's basically dependent on Verstappen having a very, very poor 2 races if he's going to meet that criteria. Whether or not they activate any kind of release clause or move him to RB on the basis of that 1 clause alone, that remains to be seen. But in the context of the championship at large, Sergio is currently 6th. He finished last season 2nd to Max. And what makes it even worse for Sergio is that both the Mercedes drivers are now within only 8 points of him. And given the steps forward that Mercedes has taken in recent weeks, it's not out of the realms of possibility, but by the time we get to the summer break, Sergio Perez will be 8th in the Drivers' Championship, which understandably for Red Bull isn't acceptable. Christian Horner himself has said it's unsustainable. We've talked a lot about in the past about how, in terms of sustainability, how they can fight with one hand essentially tied behind their back. And with McLaren making the gains that they are as well, and where they are in the Constructors' Championship, it's not out of the realms of possibility by current trajectory that they overtake Red Bull by the end of the season. Perez has only scored 15 points in the last 6 rounds. Nico Hülkenberg has scored more points than that in the last 2 in a Haas. So that gives you some context there. So yeah, quite a long answer to what can be a short answer. But yes, he is very much a danger and they can get rid of him if they wanted to.
Definitely a nerve-wracking situation for Sergio, who effectively needs to pretty much get on the podium in the next 2 races, for one of those clauses to not be activated. So, it's stuff to definitely keep an eye on. It's a good story that could develop as we approach the summer break. Ian, we'll fire the next one over to you. And Simon, thank you very much for your question. This one comes from the First BT, and I quite like this question. Why is Lewis Hamilton dominance remembered more favourably than other driver dominance?
First BT, what a question.
It's a great one.
For me, it is a great question. It is a really great question. And for me, I think there are numerous factors at play here. Okay, we're going through Max Verstappen's kind of time at the moment. And I think with Lewis, because we've had that period away, because Max is currently dominating, therefore we've got that greater reflection on Lewis's period. And I think there's part of it as well is due to, it's just the fact the time that we're in. obviously we always reflect fondly on Ayrton Senna's years, and we look back on the Michael Schumacher period as well. But I think as time slowly moves on, and the further you get away from those earlier periods of domination, then the one that's always more to the forefront of your mind is the one that arguably carries greater weight. As I say, at the moment, give it maybe 3, 4, 5 years, and maybe we'll look back on Max's period of time at the moment, his period of dominance, with similar rose-tinted glasses, etc. I think there's also another element to why we look fondly on Lewis's period in the spotlight in terms of his dominance. And it might be a slightly controversial answer, but I think there is weight to what I'm about to say. I think as well that because he is the first black driver to have come to the forefront in the sport, where he has trodden a path no other driver before him has ever done. He has raised the profile of a minority in a very white-dominated sport. He has also done so much good behind the scenes as well for raising the profile of minorities. And I think the off-track stuff, allied to what he has done on track, just adds to this greater aura around him. Whereas, and of course, if you consider that the modern era that we live in now as well, with regard to social media, the various platforms now in which a sports star is able to appear and gain so much greater traction than any of his peers before him. So I think it's just particularly the era in which we live and what Lewis has done, obviously on track pertinently, but also off track aligned to it. So I hope that is a reasonable answer. As I say, that's personal opinion. Maybe other people will see it differently. But as I say, I'm just trying to marry the two things together, the on track and off track, aligned as well with the current era in which we're in.
I think that's an absolutely incredible answer and bang on the money. I think the thing to add on to that as well is, us three here are all British, and obviously for people in the United Kingdom, he also holds quite a symbolic, figure, because he is this, British sporting legend, and because that holds extra in our hearts as well. Sam,
it'll be the same. It'll be the same. Just briefly.
Yeah.
It'll be the same for the Dutch fans.
Exactly, Max. Exactly.
Right now, in the Netherlands, they are going through that same kind of feeling and emotion and riding that with Max at this period of time. And I have no doubt when Max stops racing or Max's period of dominance ends, wherever that might be, then like in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years time, whatever, they are going to be those Dutch fans and we've seen them around circuits around the world, and what a noise and spectacle that they make. Those Dutch fans are going to be looking on Max's period of dominance with equal dewy eyes, shall we say, because what he's doing for them in raising not just Formula One in the Netherlands, but sport in general is magnificent, and he has to be applauded for what he is doing in the Netherlands right now.
Absolutely, an incredible answer, Ian Major. And the first BT, what a question. Thank you very much for sending that in. Sam, we're going to fire the final question to you because you are Mr. McLaren. That's your new name. And it comes from Britt, who was sending questions in before. So Britt, thank you. It's amazing that you're sending in more questions. We love answering them. We spoke about Oscar Piastri. Now it's a question on Lando. Did McLaren make a mistake putting Lando on soft tyres for his final stint? And could he have got Lewis Hamilton?
I think absolutely that was a mistake. Yeah. I think McLaren would themselves be the first to admit that. But it's the second half is very interesting to tackle. But just to finish the first half off, I think Andrea Stella himself said there was self-doubt in the team. There was almost too much time to think. There was, they had that fresh set of mediums. They had it all ready to go. They had the optimum strategy. They had Oscar on the mediums. Everything they needed to take that right route was there, and yet they didn't in the heat of the moment. And that is something for the team to learn. and you need to make mistakes to get better, to move forward. But in terms of whether or not he could have got Lewis, he could have got Lewis on the softs had he been able to manage them in the way that Lewis did. But on the mediums, I think he really would have been putting the pressure on Lewis. I think he certainly would have been much better able to defend from Max. So I think, it's completely plausible that he would have been challenging Lewis for the race win.
Great answer, Britt. Thank you very much. And fans, for all those who sent your questions in that we answered, thank you very, very much. And for those who have a question but didn't send it in, please be sure to do so for next week's fan questions video. And of course, it's important to know our latest prize giveaway for you guys. Racing News 365 are giving away tickets to this season's Belgian Grand Prix, which looks set to be an absolute thriller. From Ian, Sam, and myself, this has been Racing News 365 Answers Fan Questions. See you later.
Take care, folks.
Bye for now.